All right, I'm here with my friend Randle Loab, who I've known for a long time. He's a um, homeless advocate. Um, he's graduated from Isla School of Theology. He's a, I mean, just I don't know, Randall. You can explain everything else you do. There's so much there, um, but he's a poet, writer, um, and a sage, in my opinion. And Randall, tell me a little bit about yourself.
What a question.
Where you where do you stay nowadays? What does your life look like?
Um, it's been um, unassuming for like half my life, actually. I used to have my own home. I wistfully remember um, the serenity and the calmness of being in my own place and being able to be in my own room, in my own bed, and come hell or high water feeling safe. And I used to work at the same time as a teenager with people who were in the middle of North Philly in an area where I was working as a boy in gray in a hospital. I was about 15, and I used to cut school and go and hang out with the people who were there and do various chores like feed them and hang out, talk, go to um, appointments they had, wheel them around in wheelchairs, um, and take care of them. I did that for about 6 years until I was in college. And I always wanted to work with people who were living on the edge in terms of their um, feeling as if their lives were um, obliterated or forgotten or thrown away. So I started that, and I lived at the time in my parents' house in a suburb of Philadelphia, 9 miles from Center City. And I used to feel as if, almost like Siddhartha, that the world was completely different on the outside of the palace walls. And why was it that way?
Where are you staying now?
I live in a hotel for non-congregate shelter for people who are um, seriously ill or disabled, called Aloft, run by the Salvation Army. And I've been there since I stopped a job where I was the caretaker of a property at a registered neighborhood organization in Capitol Hill, which I had done for several years. And I decided to go there because I wanted to start over again. And I looked into some other program like Fort Lyon, where people come from all over the state to live together in community. But they didn't really have an idea as to what to do with me, and I didn't really feel like it was what I needed to do because I'm estranged from all of my great grandchildren, grandchildren, children, family altogether, and have been for most of my life. I have an anti-personality disorder. I guess that's what they call it. But I sure have yearned to find community again. And I used to, at one point, be in the Catholic Worker House, which was one of my best places ever in the city of Denver, and managed their thrift store um, and lived with Joe in the basement. And that was wonderful, really, but I wanted more. I wanted to be in a place where I could be in relationship to other people, and you sort of are in sort of in isolation in the Catholic worker, even though you're not. And I won't explain that, but it's true. And I really feel like that's the goal, is to be in some place with other people, like the Catholic worker, like an intentional community, like um, the the farms or the places where people all contribute. And Al Zook, was used to be a part of the Denver Voices, and I was a writer for them. He moved to a place like that in a really cold area, I think in Michigan, and I really miss that kind of community where we're not looked upon as lacking, but looked at as part of um, the grist, the community of healers taking care of one another. Um, and with our strengths and weaknesses, acknowledging the fact that we really need to be together. And that's all I really am looking for at this point. I'm almost 72, January 29, to be a part of for the rest of my life. And I'm part of a church, but I don't really feel like I'm much a part of anything that matters in that sense either, because I really believe, again, in this partnership and this collaboration. I have this vision of not just being the father of children or of grandchildren, but being a part of a clan rather than that takes care of each other. And I used to see this in places like in West Virginia, when I would go out in the country, where the people would do various chores for everybody in the whole community. I went to a Thanksgiving where a grandmother produced all of the food for the banquet by herself on a wood stove in the middle of like nowhere. And people, well, just to give an example, Puerto Rico, which I lived in too, and was like that, was like this. People would genuinely give you anything and everything that they had, whenever it was that it was something that came up, just to say something to you, and just to say, you belong. And I couldn't believe that there were places like this in my youth, when I was in my 20s, that I yearned for now in my 70s.
So, Randall, one of the amazing things about you is you relate to the world completely different than other people. You see the world differently. Your opinions about things are completely different than other people. Would you agree with that?
Amen.
Yeah.
Even though I was trained at Iliff School of Theology as a pastoral counselor, caretaker, I feel like a lot of times I'm an outlier.
I'm going to ask you this question. What role do you think trauma's played in how you see the world?
What role has what played?
Trauma.
Oh, excuse me. Trauma. I talk about that a lot. I see a psychologist every week in the afternoon. And sometimes it's sort of nondescript or boring. And then other times it really churns the fires within me. Last week was that, this week I should say, was that that opportunity. And she was questioning my perception about people having the strength of will to take care of themselves even if they're homeless. And I was talking to her about how I had come to what I believe in terms of cooperation and partnership, based upon the fact that we all need to have purpose, and that just allowing somebody to hang out and just like stay in the midst of this mess, whatever it is not fair. And so she challenged me, and it was really well said. What she said was, if you were the recipient of this and we took you and told you that you had to go to Fort Lyon and you couldn't come back, and that was that, and you had to figure out what to do, would that have been all right? And I said, no, not at first. But I said, I think I might have adapted to it if there was really some way that I could have basically figured out how to put the points together. I said, but I feel like it was amorphous and so forth. And I'm still trying to struggle with the question that she raised, because I think it's important. Um, I was impacted by trauma, not to my awareness though. Early in my life, I didn't realize that it was the case until this psychologist, this doctor of psychology, started to get involved in my trying to get um, um, SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance. And I came to understand when she did this that there were things that were missing, points that were forfeited in my development because arrested in my development because I could not cope with them, and so figured out a way to create a kind of a fantasy world, a way of protecting myself from anyone. And it was hard for that reason for me to be a father and to trust and to really trust myself and to feel as if I could really um, accept the responsibility and not like screw it up. So at this point in my life, I have to say, um, like um, Jacqueline Nadine Harris, that you can get over trauma, but it's still there. It still underlies your character and development and has been with me because I wasn't diagnosed with any mental health anything until I was like 50. So that was 22 years ago.
And how many diagnoses have you had, roughly?
Real ones, I think two. I had some very fine doctors, though. Elizabeth Cookson being one of the best, and Ann Garrett Mills another. And so they didn't mess around. They mostly stuck to the original diagnosis at the Jefferson Mental Health Center of being bipolar. But as time went on, it became clear that that was really not it. But at some point, they thought I was in the Asperger spectrum in some form, which proved to be um, silly. And then looking at this thing of narcissism, and there's a form of it where you loathe yourself. And I tried to commit suicide over a period of many years, from about 1995 to 2001, ardently, and was in a coma at the just before the incident of 9/11 at a hospital, and I was unconscious for a week or so, and then when I was released, it was when the buildings were blown up, and I felt almost a kind of a sense of hostility that I was still around, and it was like a real ultimate issue in my life because I began to understand that not only was I really sick, but that really everything I was doing was counter to what I was put here for. And so I might as well get busy doing the opposite of that. But the troubles have stayed. And anybody and everybody always asks me whether or not I'm serious about killing myself. And I vehemently say every day, but I don't plan to act on it, which I think you need to basically all heed because I'm on a hero's journey. I don't have that as a need in order to fulfill my stupid life, as opposed to um, living with will and with bravado and with intention, which is what I am doing now. I mean, it might not make sense to most people. I'm sure it doesn't. Not to my family, not to anybody I know. But what I'm doing is exploring where it is that I can be that makes sense to me, and where I can be of value in a real way, um, until the time that I actually die. Uh, and there's no substitute for that struggle. And so it's not going to end my life. It's going to propel it and continue it, even though I'm still sick. And just like with alcoholism or any addiction, you know you're sick, and that's half of the battle of taking care of yourself.
You were talking about how you build a fantasy kind of, or you did when you were young, to protect yourself.
Amen.
Do you still protect yourself?
Yeah, because you don't know um, who really gets you, first of all, or where you belong. A lot of things are a lot more precarious for a 70-year-old person as a 20-year-old. And so it's hard to, like, really be close to anybody without having the fear that um, they might not be able to put up with you and hurt you in some way. And I know that a lot of the people that I've loved have been hurt by me, but by the same token, I think they don't understand the fact that in my way I was always vulnerable and didn't know what to do about it, especially as a father. I mean, it was like every day was like a crisis in my own inside of me about how it is that I should take care of them and whether or not I was worthy of it. So yeah, no, I have a really hard time with trust.
Yeah, yeah. What does work mean to you, Randall?
It's being alive. It's breathing. It's the most ultimate and issue and axiom of all relationship. It's a constant. Um, I know that I'm planning on doing that till I'm dead, and I can't see being here and not working. And it doesn't matter on what. Having the consciousness of getting up, moving, stimulating your senses, being aware of space, being ready, being willing and able to go and do whatever task it is, whether it be making coffee or cleaning something or being somewhere. It really matters to me. I take it incredibly serious. I'm very intense about it. Some people don't actually get that either, is that I don't really feel there's a separation between being alive and working.
What do you mean by that?
That in order for a body, an embryo, a baby, to be born, she or he or all of us are constantly exploring. We're learning, we're defining, we're reaching out, we're grasping, we're tasting, we're using all kinds of ways of of um, of of understanding our relationship of everybody and everything around us. You can see that definitely with an infant, how incredibly alive they are to everything that happens around them, even when in the very early stages they can hardly see. They're still able to basically comprehend pretty much everything in the environment around them. And um, I think that never stops. I was there when my father died, and the ultimate part of life when you die is still an exploration and a reaching out, a grasping, um, a sense of what death is, and that's the gift of life, is that it's endless. It also goes on. I know this is true from the inception of whatever ancestors until the end of time, of all of what we are in the semination of our existence. So it's not, doesn't even begin and end with your life.
So a little while ago, Randall, we were talking about on the way here. We were talking about how you don't really get along with people. Um, is that kind of a way to protect yourself, just to keep yourself distance from folks, or what do you think?
Yeah, it goes back to Frederick, Dad. My father was always really kind and nice to me, even when I was a jerk, a schnook, you know. And I felt, um, if he really, really cared, he would show some kind of feeling of the opposite of, antipathy or anger, which he never did. I mean, I think he did maybe twice. And it always bothers me because I if I know you, I expect you to be real. If you're pissed with me, that's all right. But many people are like walking on eggshells, and they'll say to me, or somebody will say to me that they're scared of you, and I'll say, "Huh?" And I know what it's from. It's that intensity, but that intensity is a way of protection, yes, but it's also a way of saying, "Are you really interested in learning, or are we just going to BS with each other?" And if you're going to go into it like Dad did, with just unconditional love, well, it kind of like seems to me it's a little fake, because where are you in this? And if you're not, then I have to essentially adapt to you too. And so that calls into question that in a relationship, I've never had a good relationship with a person. I'm attracted to women, so we get that straight. Um, and, of the opposite sex, I haven't had that kind of like real companionship like I really have fantasized about. And I think it's because of that, because most of the people I've related to um, kind of were like walking on eggshells instead of like being themselves and saying, I'm not really your mom, and I'm not interested in being your sister, and I really don't have no patience for your jack, stuff. If you want to be with me, fine, but if you're going to, then hit the road, Jack. And they seem to have none of that kind of verve and 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 interest in that, and that's what I want in a relationship to a person. And it doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman in that. I mean, I have lots and lots of friends, but that's how I know if they can really say, well, you really screwed up, and I'll say, you're right, but there is tomorrow.
Yeah, I know you and I have butted heads in the past.
Amen.
But our relationship doesn't change.
Well, I think it does, though. I think actually our relationship does change. But what it does is it changes in the sense that inevitably, in every sense, any person who comes into connection with another person or anything changes each other. and changes the whole connection and relationship of everything to each other. And that's actually the more important part of relationship, is not whether or not you're simpatico and everything's roses and, like they do on the Hallmark, like films and so on, but whether or not really you can put up with the stinky nature of your differences and then say, that's an interesting part of him that I never saw before. Well, that's something that really I don't understand, but that's his business. And you can respect that, and you can then say how it influences you. There's a very beautiful film done called The Hours, of these women, very accomplished actresses, incredibly accomplished. And Ed Harris, I shouldn't have left him out of it, but still, accomplished actress. And it has to do with Virginia Woolf, who's one of my favorite authors. And it has to do with her incredibly important work of Mrs. Dalloway. And they act out the whole scenario of what goes on in the story. And the acting is superb, and the people basically really come up with some of these issues that are difficult, like suicide, for example, and freedom, and ultimately relationships and what they mean. And the major issue of it is abandonment, because that's what happens to the main character, who is played by this boy and then this man who has AIDS. And you just are like overwhelmed by it, because you're saying, oh my God, she created this story about herself and put herself in this book, and it really mirrors her life. And yet it deals with these universal subjects of what relationships really mean when the relationships are not easy, and they're not. And you basically have to be thrust into whether or not you're really going to hold forth in them and continue with them no matter what. And that's what you have to say about The Hours. I've written about that often, because I really believe the theme has a lot to say about us and how we live, whether or not we're willing to put up with each other. And the man who's her husband tries to protect her, and he's completely incompetent in it, because Virginia has no way that she can basically protect herself. She's living in a state of terror all the time, even though she's a really accomplished author and everything else. She has no way to basically compensate for the world. And so when finally the resolution of this comes, he has to admit that even though his wife is sick, that it's her business how she deals with her life. And even though she takes her life inevitably, that actually that's part of what I'd said a long time ago about a hero's journey. That's not something to basically put down. That's something to celebrate.
Yeah, I agree. So you brought up abandonment, talking about that. What does abandonment mean for you? What has it meant for you?
Well, you asked about trauma a long time ago. My mother was an unusually erudite scholar, an actress on stage, actually, accomplished in dozens of ways. Very early, like Mozart, accomplished, a genius, and also troubled at the same time. And I probably inherited most of what is part and parcel of my character from my mother, I have to say. When Frederick, my dad, was driving when I was a baby in the womb, actually, in Mom's womb, she was dealing with some depression. It was 8 years after my sister was born, before my father went to World War II. And Mother was extremely upset. And so while Frederick was driving down near this church in the community, jetsoned her out of the car with me being carried. And I didn't understand it at all, of course. That wasn't something I was conscious of. It was explained to me. And at first, it basically seemed to me to be, just like a story of some kind of, myth. But in understanding my mother and my relationship to her, I can see that for many things that she had a lot of trouble with uh, giving up what was essential to her well-being and probably essential to her survival mentally, emotionally, to deal with her difficult son, who is probably impacted by that impact. And so my family, meaning my two daughters and my son in particular, but probably their children too, and I have a dozen of them, feel this abandonment and have expressed that. Actually, it's not something they feel, it's something they've essentially told me. And I think they're right. I think that in a certain sense, I felt incompetent to do the work that was necessary to do for them to be able to depend upon me, to trust me. And I do I have remorse about it? Yeah, of course. But I realize, just like this woman, Mrs. Dalloway, um, that, and she says it better than I ever could. Well, not necessarily. I put my trademark on these ideas too. Um, that I was struggling um, to um, to keep from suffocating, and in order to survive, I had to um, do things that really I didn't want to, and I don't feel good about them, of course. And she expressed the same thing, and I think my mother, in a certain sense, admitted that at the very end of her life, how um, the three of us became disconnected and were abandoned. And her father had problems, actually, and her mother with her, and mom with me, and I think with my family, I do. And for a long time, I was miserable about that. Couldn't sleep. Was frenetic. Was completely um, disturbed. But now that I'm older, and older in the sense of where I am in my life, I don't feel the same way about it. I think that there are choices that we make sometimes that are ugly. And at the time they may make sense, but they don't.
So, Randall, you've been real, real with me today, man. Real honest, and I appreciate it, man. Is there anything else you'd like people to know about you, or like to say right now?
Yeah, people will almost ask you, if there was nothing else that was going to happen and the world was going to end, what would you do? And I always say, in a sort of philosophical but actually joking way, but not so much, breathe. It is really the essence of everything.
Yeah, amen to that, brother. Amen. Well, Rand, I just want you to know that you're loved, man. No matter what, you're loved, and I appreciate you. And thanks for spending some time with me.
Thank you. Do you know what time it is? I thought nobody was going to be down here.